I'd like to echo what some others have already said. Richard Madsen, for example, talked about the importance of these dialogues as a way of communicating what we mean when we say we value this, what we mean when understanding what other people are saying. And what Margot just had to say about the need for this sort of dialogue. If you look, for example, at the PIPA poll, the PIPA BBC poll, at its height, 90% of Chinese had a favorable view of China, and worldwide, the conception was more about 40%. So there was a big perception gap. The world looking at the United States, also about 40% favorable. Americans looking at America, about 60% favorable. So there's a perception gap. And part of this, of course, is related to the depth of knowledge and the breadth of knowledge. We each tend to know each other, know ourselves better than we know others. And we tend to have a better appreciation for the nuance in these things. So gatherings like this do a lot to address that. And I really appreciate the forum for what it does and this opportunity to participate in it. In looking at millennials, and this is not a term used in China. We'll get to the definitions and we'll talk about new normal in just a minute. I have about 5 times as many slides as everyone else, so it'll be a little bit more like a movie than a paper, the reading of a paper, but I will plow through. First, an advertisement. The U.S.-China Institute exists to inform public discussion about the nature and the importance of the U.S.-China relationship. We make documentary films, including films. There was a lot of discussion yesterday about the role of the media. We make documentary films about the role of American reporters reporting on China. We also have conferences and these kinds of things looking specifically at perception gap. This happens to be a book that was put together by 10 authors, 3 of whom are represented here, talking about how the media in different countries, China, Japan, the United States, elsewhere, talk about the controversies associated with these rocks. Okay, the Diaoyudao Senkaku dispute. Go to our website, take a look at these things. One of the things that we have is a database on more than 1,000 U.S.-China exchanges, because what tends to make the news is, of course, conflict, not the many ways in which we collaborate, not events like this where we talk concretely about things, not the ways that Shanghai works with cities all over the world to improve city management. So that's some of what we do. Okay, so end of advertisement, beginning of our discussion of millennials. This term has quite a lot of currency in the United States, in part because every business person wants millennials. They want to sell to millennials, they employ millennials. Everybody's trying to understand them. The term comes from the idea of people born around the year 2000, millennials. And it's in contrast to Generation X, the baby boomers, all of that sort of thing. In China, there's not a single term. We have the Ba Ling Ho, we have Zhou Ling Ho, and then also have this Chen Nian Yi Dai, that sort of discussion. But this is what we're talking about, people born since 1980. And with regard to the new normal, everybody here knows what is referred to here, but just a reminder, slower economic growth, greater emphasis on the quality of products, the quality of buildings, the quality of everything, rather than just the number. Instead of emphasizing the, zhongchan zhi, you're going to emphasize the zhiliang, the quality. Efficiency more than speed. So it's not enough to have a machine that can make a lot of products. You want to have a machine that makes it with less energy, that makes these products with less pollution, these sorts of things. And of course, this entire conference is about innovation and the idea of innovation driving future growth as opposed to infrastructure investment, that sort of thing. So that's what is meant by the Xintangtai, the new normal. Who are the millennials? In China, here's our population diagram, and you'll see I'll put up an American population diagram in a second. It looks quite different. Most people, or many people, focus on the gap between the yellow and the white here. And of course, that's because there's the difference in terms of the number of boys and girls being born. But this is the group we're focusing on. Age 15 to age 34. And in China, that's 415 million people. That's the third largest country in the world. And so it's an enormous group. It's bigger than any previous generation. It will shape the world. In the United States, the population chart looks quite different because of many different things, immigration and the lack of a population control policy. And in the United States, also greater balance between men and women. But here it's still a large group. Emphasis in the United States has been on the baby boom generation. The millennials are a larger group numerically. Well, what's happening in China? Much slower growth in the population. It, in fact, dropped dramatically from the 90s to the 2000s. Many fewer young people, okay, as a proportion of the population, dropping significantly, more older people. It's an aging society. Devoted an entire first day at the conference to this. Well, China is going to depend on these millennials. Everybody will, but China especially. This group has to support a rapidly aging population, a population that has not accumulated resources, economic resources of its own. And so it's going to have to take care of these people. It's this group that it's going to have to build this more balanced, market-driven economy. It's this group that is going to have to address huge problems, the enormous inequality that exists in China, as well as the terrible economic or environmental degradation. This group, and of course they're not alone, there's a lot of other people, but they are the ones that are going to have to make it happen. They have to be more productive and more innovative than any previous Chinese generation. I don't mean they're going to have to work harder. That's unlikely. They're going to have to work much smarter, much more efficiently. And so when I was living in the countryside 20 years ago, and this was one of the factories that I visited, you had this very low-tech, low-skilled rural production. And over time, of course, China has moved on to this high-tech fabrication. And so this is a hard drive factory where they're assembling these parts, urban workers, this sort of thing. But now, there's not enough people in China, believe it or not, turning to robots. China is the world's largest market for industrial robots. And here we're training them and using them. Huawei itself, Huawei is known for, Professor Fudan and I were talking, for employing more than 1 million people. They also employ 10,000 robots, and they're buying more. Okay. China's investing in its young people. Look at the great expansion in terms of the numbers of institutions of higher learning. Tremendous expansion since 1978, 84, all the way up to 2014. And in terms of the number of students enrolled, look at this explosion. China has bet heavily on this generation. Look at the growth. And of course, this is why not all of these people, the 6 or 7 million who graduate this year, are going to instantly have jobs. Those of you here at Fudan, don't worry, but a lot of other people are worried. And one of the places that Fudan graduates and other graduates used to go was to the Guanghua. They would try to enter the civil service. And so here we are in Hubei. This is the flood in to take the test. But if we look at this, civil service jobs are expanding. Li Keqiang a couple years ago said we have to cut it back, but now it's growing, and it's growing by more than 10% per year. But guess what? Fewer people are actually wanting those jobs. Not by my clock. In any case, but interest is declining. In 2010, 59 people took the exam for every position. In 2014, 40 people for every position. Do you want a job? Well, Horizon took a poll, and those born in the 1960s, of course, they're not applicants, 70, same thing, but a higher proportion of those people said, yeah, government job is a great deal. But now, a minority of people born in the 1990s think it's all that attractive. What is the emphasis on? Entrepreneurship. So you have Forbes with its study of 30 entrepreneurs under 30. News China focusing on this sort of thing. That sort of issue. One of the things abroad that there's a lot of focus on is that only children are difficult employees. They were difficult children, now they're difficult employees. They change jobs, they don't want to work late, they have different expectations. And some surveys have carried this out. I actually think this study is not very good, but it attracted enormous attention when it was done, and it focused, it said, Chinese millennials are risk averse, they don't want to take risk, and they're less trusting of each other. Well, we've been looking in the West at young people for a long time. Here, 1993, The Economist, China belongs to me. I've got my sunglasses, I'm ready to go. Or I've colored my hair and I've got Che Guevara and Mao Zedong in the Che Guevara style, that sort of thing. How China has changed. So we've been looking at young people for a long time. There are dangers in generalizing. And of course, that's what I've been doing. Limits of generalization. Any single case may be wrong. Also, as people age, they tend to be more like the people that they're replacing. Every parent has said, I can't believe that I'm saying what my mother said to me. That sort of thing. And of course, we may overemphasize the particularities of this moment, this enormous expansion of affluence in China, these sorts of things. Here's, it's from a great photo series, Adrian Fisk, I Speak China. And he goes around, he gives people cards, they write a sentence, he takes a picture of them. And this fellow says, you know, a lot of people think I may be a bad person, but in fact, I'm quite obedient, okay? I ting hua, that sort of thing. Chinese millennials are worldly, they're materialistic, they're patriotic or nationalistic, however you may describe, and the 90s generation is even more than the 80s generation, all of these things. With regard to politics, and I'm not going to talk very much about that. We've got a couple of wonderful studies looking at how China's younger people really expect their government to be more accountable, more transparent. Well, so do Chinese leaders say they want those things too. Chen Shengluo, a political scientist in Beijing, did a survey in 5 schools and found that Chinese students had a great affinity for a separation of powers. The notion of some sort of checks and balances, maybe an independent judiciary, this sort of thing. Worldly, here's my example of worldly. If you're a Chinese smartphone user, if you're on Chinese social media, you've seen these pictures. This Tibetan couple, they're ethnic Tibetans who spent $1 gazillion on their wedding photos, taking them all over, including in Thailand and other places. And so here we've got them looking, you know, like sophisticates, stepping in and out of a Ferrari, and then being in traditional garb. And the Xinhua headline is, yes, aren't they worldly? Chinese young people are, of course, watching everything. House of Cards, learning the American political system in excruciating, painful detail. Or they're watching Big Bang Theory and thinking that every young scientist lives quite as dysfunctional a life as these characters. Chinese folk, young people are materialistic, crowding into their Apple stores and these sorts of things. And of course, the greatest example and the worst example of Chinese materialism, Xiao Shi Dai, you know, this particular film. And the People's Daily had a cartoon with the only thing this author knows how to write is what? Material goods, right? Wu Zhi. Materialism. China, this French poll that was carried out, worldwide emphasis here on China, they found that 68% of Chinese said, I feel a lot of pressure to be successful and make money. This was the greatest in the world, the highest level. In the US, you know, another nation of ambitious types, 46%. In Japan, 29%. What I own is a measure of my success. So success, depends on how many goods I've accumulated. China, again, the world leader in this, as the example, right? And in fact, the Chinese press picked up on the fact that the foreign press had picked up on this and said foreigners are talking about us as being materialistic. I'm going to have to race through some things. Suffice it to say, Chinese young people think they're going to make more money than they do today. Why do they think that? Because it's been true. Look at the rapid expansion in per capita GDP. Look at that explosion since China entered the World Trade Organization in 2001, virtually a vertical line. Where do they spend money? They spend it online, among other things. I'm going to skip over. That's why Alibaba has become such a gigantic phenomena. Alibaba sold as much material in a single quarter as Amazon sold all of last year. In terms of volume of traffic, and over half of it on mobile. Cell phones, now the virtue. Now, what are you using your cell phone for? Not just goods, but also services. This is a Chinese company that's gone to the United States, primarily to serve Chinese visiting the United States with cars, drivers in an Uber-like situation. Chinese are marrying later, in fact, than Americans. If you look at 2013, the average age for men at first marriage, age 30, for women, 28. Okay, overall, it's not quite as old as that. But this is a huge shock to the system. Confucius said we had to be settled at 30, and now these people are just getting started. And of course, more on that. Not everybody thinks they can marry because of the expense. Not everybody thinks that if they marry, they want to have children. That's the example here. And of course, getting married is hard, and parents are involved. So you have marriage markets in parks all over the country, right? Chengdu, Dalian, and all of these advertisements for people. Okay, Fudan is a leader of the research. We know a lot about millennials in America. Not so much is known in China, but Fudan has really taken the lead. The team of researchers here have carried out some fantastic stuff. And one of the things they found is that almost half of Chinese now live together before they get married. Now, I got married in China a long time ago. It would have been illegal, would have been jailed for doing something like this, but now it's almost the norm. But why are they doing it? It's not because they're trying it out. They plan to get married, all of this sort of thing. It's because what? No house. Without a house, can't have a marriage. And so declining interest in having children, especially among college educated, but also among Nomingong, the migrants. I have to close things off. Millennials are rewriting motherhood here in China, the hot mom phenomena, increasing articles, websites devoted to it. Young Chinese are interested in causes, Special Olympics, prevent shark skin, all of these kinds of things. Now, we got to this point with Professor Madsen talking about civil society. Civil society exists whether you want it or not. It exists because people are people. They share values, they get together, they talk. And there are quite a few issues regarding this. And of course, China has been quite nervous about associations that aren't sanctioned. And so this is one of the big issues, of course, going forward. 谢谢你们。